everyone. In this video, we are going to talk about Adrienne Rich, a poet of towering reputation and towering rage, who of course had a great role in bringing the oppression of women and lesbians to the forefront of poetic discourse. She is a writer whose personal has always become political, and she has always presented herself as an individual with a private and public life of her own, as a spokesperson of women's issues, as a sort of a representative of all women. She is of course an American radical feminist, a lesbian, a leading figure in the feminist and lesbian movements. If we go for her life and her poetry, moves from heterosexuality via androgyny onto lesbianism and a community of women. As I told you before, she has always been a voice for women as a whole and has always criticized patriarchy, institutionalization of all sorts, sexual binaries, etc. And to talk about her own personal life, we can say that with her marriage to a socially and financially well-situated man in 1953 and begetting 3 sons in him, Rich had always tried to fulfill the cult of femininity. She has always tried to fulfill the expectations of her environment, which was of course shaped by the ideology of femininity of this 1950s and 60s. But then all the time while she was fulfilling this sort of a feminine mystique, she had always struggled hard to establish her own identity as a poet and as a woman, a person, as an individual with her own right, who is a woman poet, of course, so very different from a male poet. So all through these years, we find that she was struggling hard to tackle this complexity that she was facing, the sort of duality that she was facing in her roles of a mother, of a wife, of a poet, of an individual. Now, she of course was trying to fulfill, she was trying to perfect in everything. As a mother, she was trying to perfect there, as a wife, as a woman, as a poet. So what happened was that she was kind of she somehow turned out to be failure in lots and lots of things. So she later on thematized this conflict that she was facing in her life. She expressed all these things in her poetry as well as in her essays. So though formally she was adhering to the cult of motherhood, cult of marriage, etc., she did try to express critical opinions about these institutions in her poetry from the 1950s onwards. And we see that later on there was a sort of growing dissatisfaction with her own marriage, which you could of course put or place in the context of the women's movement which was happening at that time, of which she was of course one of the main activists. And it was after she became a kind of a activist in the women's movement, which this feminist movement led her to look for alternative ways of living in the form of androgyny, which later on she explored in her poetry in the early 1970s, which you can see as diving into the wreck as an example for that. So with the discovery of lesbianism for herself, she was trying to redefine her own self, and from lesbianism she moves on to a woman-woman relationship, woman-woman community, and she ends up by finding this woman-woman relationship and woman-woman community as a practicable alternative to heterosexuality. Sexuality of course reigns, or sexuality of course become a very potent theme in her poems, where she does not define sexuality as a mere physical intimacy between a partner with a partner. Instead, it turns out to be, sexuality turns out to be a very critical and social critical statement for her, a very social statement for her, where she is trying to find an identity of her own, where she is trying to find love in her life, which is of course apart from or separated from the physical intimacies. So we can see that almost all of her works, all of her poetry or essays that she was writing is very much personal, and probably we see that her personal was turning political and poetical as well. So her personal turns political and poetical. So all these things, personal, political and poetical, could be linked in her poems. So for her, she says that poetry is not something which could be taken as a lotion, as an emotional massage, or as a kind of linguistic therapy. It is for her, it is not just a blueprint or an instruction manual or a billboard. Instead, poetry for her is a keen-edged beacon by which women's lives and women's consciousness could be illuminated. As I told you before, she has always talked about this identity politics of women, identity, the problems, the crisis in identity for women. She has always tried, and she was often criticized for her harsh depictions of men, and sexuality, politics, history, all these things, identity, all these things does play a very important role in her poetry. And she has always talked for the enfranchisement, voiced for the enfranchisement of women, enfranchisement, or in a sense, she has always talked for women's agency, and she has always voiced against women's disenfranchisement at the hands of men. And she always wanted that to end. She always wanted women to gain an agency of her own. Moving on to her works, she has written, as I told you, lots and lots of poetry collection, essays, etc. These are some of the works that she has written. A Change of World, which was published in the year 1951. The Diamond Cutters in 1955. Snapshots of a Daughter-in-Law in 1963. Necessities of Life in 1966. Leaflets in 1969. The Will to Change in 1971. Diving into the Wreck in 1973. Of Woman Born, Motherhood as an Experience and Institution in 1976. The Dream of a Common Language in 1978. These are some of the works written by Adrienne Rich. Now let's look at this particular essay that you have got to study, Claiming an Education, which is written by Adrienne Rich. This is a speech actually. This is a convocation speech. A convocation speech which was delivered in September 1977 at Douglas College, which is an all-women's college in New Jersey. Now this is a speech which is addressed to the graduating women students of Douglas College, and of course this is a speech which is addressed not only to the students but also to the teachers over there. So she is dividing this particular speech into two parts. On the one hand, she is addressing the women students over there, the need for education, what does education do to women students, what is the kind of education that is being given now, what is the problem with that sort of an education, what are women students to do. Then the second part is of course divided, of course talks about or talks to the teachers over there. The teachers, the male and the female teachers who are teaching in women's colleges on the one hand, or the male and female teachers who are teaching women students, be it in mixed college, be it in a women's college, or whichever college it is. It is addressed, the whole speech is addressed to the teachers of those students, of those women students who are taught in various colleges and universities across the world. Now this is So this particular speech, which is titled Claiming an Education, was first printed in the magazine called The Common Woman. The Common Woman, that is the name of the magazine in which this particular speech was first printed, which was printed in 1977, and it was later on reprinted in the collection On Lies, Secrets and Silence, Selected Prose from 1966 to 1978. So let's of course move on to this particular speech. I would just read it out and try to explain this for you. So it begins like this. For this convocation, I plan to separate my remarks into two parts. Some thoughts about you, the women students here, and some thoughts about us who teach in a women's college. But ultimately, those two parts are indivisible. If university education means anything beyond the processing of human beings into expected roles through credit hours, tests, grades, it implies an ethical and intellectual contract between the teacher and the student. This contract must remain intuitive, dynamic, unwritten, but we must turn to it again and again if learning is to be reclaimed from the depersonalizing and cheapening pressures of the present-day academic scene. Now, the speech begins with her remark that I have divided the speech into two parts. One is addressed to the women students over here, and the other one is addressed to the teachers over here. Then she talks about education. What does education do? What is the purpose of education? Usually in the present scenario, we see that education is so depersonalized and it focuses more on processing students into expected roles. It focuses on engineering students according to the demands of the society. Society demands certain group of people, and education, the syllabus, the curriculum, the academia, all these things make sure that students are being molded, students are being shaped, students are being engineered, cooked into a particular category or into a particular in a particular way, so that they fit in the society. They fit into the society. So students are of course indoctrinated into set roles by the sort of education. How is it done? You have lots and lots of systems, formal systems, by which you ensure that students are getting engineered into the role that the society want them to have. Through credit hours, lectures, attendance, assignments and seminars, exam and grades, which of course makes sure that they learn the curriculum which is being given to them, provided to them. They learn it by heart, of course, they learn it. And you just go and vomit it in the answer sheet. And what happens is you fetch marks and that's it. That is what education is. Beyond this, that is of course one part of education. That is one part of education. But beyond that, Adrienne Rich says that there is an ethical and intellectual contract which happens between a teacher and a student. There is of course an intellectual and ethical contract which happens between a teacher and a student, which is of course not written anywhere. It's unwritten, it's dynamic, it's intuitive. So in order to free education from the depersonalizing and cheapening pressures of the academic scene, we should go to this relationship between the teacher and the student. The relationship which is very ethical, or which should be very ethical, which should be very intellectual. That is the sort of contract which should be there between a teacher and a student. So if we go for that, if we go for this ethical and intellectual contract, what are the things that Adrienne Rich wants to say? The first thing I want to say to you who are students is that you cannot afford to think of being here to receive an education. You will do much better to think of being here to claim one. Now, what is the definition of claiming and receiving? In this particular paragraph, she talks about two words: to claim and to receive. Now, what is the difference between receiving and claiming? The first word is to receive, and the meaning is to come into possession of, to act as a receptacle or container for, to accept as authoritative or true. You receive. You act as a receptacle, a container. Somebody gives you something and you receive without questioning. You do not ask what is it that is being given to you. You do not ask why is it being given to you. You do not ask such questions. Questions are not asked in the process of receiving. You just receive it. Blindly, you just receive it. You just do not even bother to look at what is there. You just don't analyze. You just don't think critically about what is being received. You just accept it. Take it for granted. Accept it as gospel truth. Now that is receiving. Now what is this claiming? Claiming means to take as a rightful honor, to assert in the face of possible contradiction. Claiming means you assert, you take it as, you demand. You claim that this is mine. This is what I want and this is not what I want. Of course, if you want to know, if I would explain much more, it's like you're born with a silver spoon in your mouth and you receive things. You're just a container. You accept everything that comes your way because you're born with a silver spoon in your mouth, right? But then if you claim it, you do not have anything. You work so hard. You work so hard to get things done. Claiming needs real struggle. Claiming a space needs real struggle because you are not given that. You are not given anything. You are not given what you really want. So you claim it. You demand it. You say that this is my right. Now that is the difference that she talks about about claiming and receiving. And she tells the girl students over there that you should stop receiving education and you should claim education. You should start claiming education, claiming a space of your own. Now, one of the devastating weaknesses of university learning, of the store of knowledge, the opinion that has been handed down through academic training, has been its utmost total erasure of women's experience and thought from the curriculum, and its exclusion of women as members of academic community. Now, in this particular paragraph, she talks about the devastating weaknesses of academic learning. The first weakness of academic learning is that women's experience and thought is completely erased from the curriculum. Second one, there is a complete exclusion of women as members of academic community. Today, with increasing numbers of women students in nearly every branch of higher learning, we still see very few women in the upper levels of faculty and administration in most of the institutions. So what happens? The first thing that she talks about is the exclusion of women in the academic community as members of academic community. You do not, see, there are lots and lots of women students out there in the higher education scenario, but we do not see women students reaching up the grade, reaching up onto the administration level. Why does that happen? See, Douglas College, she talks about Douglas College or any other college for that matter, is a women's college, and even in women's college you see a male principal. Even in a women's college comes under a university which is dominated by men. And that particular university comes under state legislature which is dominated by men. So everywhere it is men. Women are completely erased from the higher education, higher academic scenario, the administrative scenario. That is one thing. how women are excluded being the members of academic community, from being the members of academic community. They are being excluded from being the members of academic community. And the second thing is, what about the total erasure of women's experience and thought from curriculum? What are you taught? What are you taught? What is the sort of education that you receive? Of course, it is receiving. You never question it, right? The most significant fact for you is that what you learn here, the very text you read, the lectures you hear, the way your studies are divided into categories and fragmented from one another, all this reflects to a very large degree neither objective reality nor an accurate picture of the past, nor a group of rigorously tested observations about human behavior. Then what is it? What you can learn here is how men have perceived and organized their experience, their history, their ideas, their social relationships. So what do you learn here? What kind of text do you read? What kind of text do you read? What kind of lectures do you get? What are the things which are taught to you as if it is objective reality? What are the things that is being taught to you as if it is the neutralized reality? As if that is real, when it's not real at all. The things that you're taught, the text that you read, the lectures that you get to hear, everything, the things that you read, everything that you read is how men have perceived and organized their experience. How men see the reality, how men perceive others, how men perceive the world. The male created history, the male created ideas of social relationships, organization, what is good and evil, what is sickness and health, everything is seen from the perspective of men. Everything. Everything you're hearing about what men, above all white men, in their male subjectivity have decided is important. Now, black and other minority people have for some time recognized that their racial and ethnic experience was not counted for their studies, broadly labeled as human, and that even sciences can be racist. So, blacks and other minority people already have understood that they are not seen or they are not included in the experiences of the so-called human, which is labeled as human. Every science, all sciences are racist and sexist. That is what Adrienne Rich says. Every study, every discourse is racist and sexist. It is the white male who define what the world should be. And it is through his eyes, the white male's eyes, that we see the world. It is through his eyes that we see the world, we perceive the world, we understand the world. And we see that, or we understand it as if it is the reality out there. As if that is the reality. Right? So, for many reasons, it has been more difficult for women to comprehend our exclusion. Blacks and other minority communities, they have already understood that those which are labeled under human do not include them. It has taken some more years for women to understand our exclusion and to realize that even the sciences can be sexist. You need to just look at just the titles of some books and you understand it clearly. And the titles goes like this: The Descent of Man, Man and His Symbols, Irrational Man, Phenomena of Man, Future of Man, Man, Science, Society, One-Dimensional Man, 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 Man everywhere. These are the books which pretend to describe human reality, when all the time it does not include one half of the human population. Right? So minority communities, black communities, they have understood it before. Now it's the turn for women to understand that. So sciences are racist and sexist. All discourses are racist and sexist, according to Adrienne Rich. Less than a decade ago, with the rebirth of feminist movement in this country, women students and teachers in a number of universities began to demand and set up women's studies courses to claim a women-directed education. And despite the inevitable accusations of unscholarly group therapy faddism, despite backlash and budget cuts, women's studies are still growing, offering to more and more women a new intellectual grasp on their lives, new understanding of our history, a fresh vision of the human experience, and also a critical basis for evaluating what you hear and read in other courses and in the society at large. Now, Adrienne Rich talks about the things or the changes that feminist movements did. What did feminist movement do? Feminist movement demanded for women's education. Feminist movement demanded for women's studies courses. Feminist movement argued for women-directed education. Feminist movement offered a new intellectual grasp on women's lives. Feminist movement gave us a new understanding of our own history, a fresh vision of human experience. Feminist movement gave us a critical basis for evaluating the life at large. What you hear, what you read, all the discourses, the society, the culture, how to read it from a woman's perspective. So feminist movement have always tried to claim a woman's space. Feminist movement have always focused on getting a woman's space, getting a woman's education. And probably feminist movement have of course succeeded in getting all these things. Now, to wind up, this is what we were talking about in this particular video. One thing is this whole essay, this whole speech, Adrienne Rich, she was addressing two categories of people. One, the women students over there, and the teachers who are teaching women students, both male and female. And the difference between claiming and receiving. What are you to do? Whether to receive or to claim. The third thing, the problems in university education. What are the problems in university education? What are the things that is being taught to us? And the fourth thing, what did feminist movement do to women? And in the next video, we will of course talk about single women, single girls, what an individual girl is supposed to do. Of course, feminist movement has done a lot of things as a collective, right? Feminist movement is a collective, a social and political collective it is. It has done a lot of things. It has done for the establishment, it has done a lot of things so as to get women's education, women's struggle getting established. It has done a lot of things. But then as an individual woman, as an individual girl student, studying there in university, what are you to do individually? That is one thing that we would focus on the next video. And the second thing is, what does Adrienne Rich tell the teachers over there, which is another very important thing that we need to talk about. Thank you all.